on, guys? There are two things that I want to bring up before you watch any of this video. I'm re-uploading this video and I'm adding this whole beginning part into the video after I already uploaded it once. And the reason I'm doing that is because I made one mistake in the video, and then there's one little thing that I want to add that I want to tell you about before you watch anything. As you can see, I got my Viper engine back in. I'm going to be rocking and rolling pretty soon, but I did want to clarify a couple things for you guys before you make the mistake that I did when you go to put all your tunnel protectors and your stud protectors in. I don't want to waste too much of you guys' time at the beginning of the video here, but I do want to talk about this really quick. So, if you don't already know, on my Viper, I'll talk about this later in the video, my track that I'm running is a 1.25 inch lug. That's the height, 1.25 inches. When these Vipers came out of the factory stock, they didn't even have an inch long lug on the track. It was like 0.9 something. So that being said, if you're running any bigger than a 1-inch track, you are going to have to cut down your tunnel protectors a little bit. Let me explain a little further. I installed the tunnel protectors in the sled. I got everything bolted up. I put my track in, put my skid in, bolted up the skid. After I bolted up the skid, I torqued everything down, and I didn't have the seat on, but I looked at the top of my tunnel and it was like bulging up a little bit. And I'm like, what is going on here? Something is not right. I looked under it. The top of my lugs on my 1.25 inch track were making contact and putting pressure up against the stud protectors, which means I did not have enough clearance for the stud protectors. So, that being said, these stud protectors, stock, they hang down 1 inch down into your tunnel, okay? And that was made to work with the 1-inch track that they came with stock. So they hang down 1 inch, and I went 1/4 of an inch over the stock lug height. I hope that makes sense. So that's where I ran into the clearance issue. To resolve the issue, what I did was I cut down my tunnel protectors, and this is a different set. I totally butchered this set. The cuts were terrible. I recommend, if you're going to cut yours down, I recommend using a wood joiner. It worked really well. You can get really, really close to 1/4 of an inch. But I had to cut down 1/4 of an inch all the way down each of the tunnel protectors, and now I have enough clearance for my 1.25 inch lug track. So, long story short, if you're running any bigger than a 1-inch track on your Viper, you're going to need to cut down the tunnel protectors a little bit before you mount everything up. Otherwise, you're going to run into clearance issues. If I had left it and they were making contact, would it have worn through? It probably would have worn in. The track probably would have worn through the plastic tunnel protector, and it probably would have worn through. I'm just not the type of person, as you probably know by my other videos, I'm pretty meticulous about my stuff. I'm not the type of person that bolts something up and I see something wrong and I'm like, oh, it'll be fine, it'll wear in. That's just not who I am. So I'll quit yapping at you, but long story short, a 1.25 inch track, you'll cut 1/4 of an inch off the entire length of the tunnel protector and everything will bolt up just fine. Now, if you're running a bigger track, like a 1.3 something, you might need to cut more than 1/4 of an inch off. But then you're going to have to think, if you're studding the track, you're going to have to think about how much clearance you have between the studs and then the top of the tunnel, so you don't tear up the top of your tunnel and tear through your gas tank. So that's just what I had to do. 1/4 of an inch ended up being perfect for me. Now I have, in between the top of my lugs and the tunnel protectors, I have like not even 1/4 of an inch. It's like perfect. So that being said, that's the one thing that was messed up with this video. You might have to cut your tunnel protectors down if you're running any bigger than a 1-inch lug track. Second thing that I forgot to mention in the video was I talked about gearing. I talked about how I switched to 8-tooth drivers, which affected my gearing, and I talked about how I figured out my gear ratio. Another thing that I forgot to mention was when you do that, and you switch down to 8-tooth drivers, your speedometer gear is still attached to your drive shaft. And so switching down to the 8-tooth drivers, if you don't do anything else and you leave the speedometer gear alone, what's going to happen is your speedometer is going to read way off. And I forgot to mention this in the video. That's why I'm adding it in now. What I did to mine was I cut one tooth off the stock speedometer gear. This was on my 9-tooth stock driver on my Viper, and I cut one little tooth off with a Dremel tool. And my speedometer's not going to be perfect. I'm okay with that, but it should be much, much closer to reading correct with one of those teeth ground off. I don't really understand the ratio behind that and the science. I'm sure there's some calculation. It's just something that I read on Totally Yamaha. I'm sure you could also get sleds like mountain sleds that came with the 8-tooth drivers. Not 100% positive if they had less teeth on their speedometer gear or not. That would be something you'd have to look into. But according to Totally Yamaha, grinding one little tooth off should get you to as close as you can to an accurate speedometer reading when you switch down to the 8-tooth drivers. So I just wanted to mention that too. And honestly, I'm okay with this because the speedometers on these probably aren't going to be super accurate, and it probably never was super accurate to begin with. So as long as I can get it as close as possible or close enough, I'm going to be happy. Anyways, I hope this clarified some things. If it didn't and you're confused about anything, feel free to reach out to me. My YouTube channel is in my bio, my Gmail is in my bio. So feel free to email me, reach out to me on the Facebook groups, leave a comment on the video. If you leave a comment on the video, I might not see it right away, but I'll probably see it I tend to see them within a week. So anyways, enjoy the rest of the video. I hope everything else helps. Everything else in the video should be just fine. What's going on, guys? Got my Viper here up on the stand because it's all torn apart right now. Show you what I got going on. I don't already know from the Facebook groups or anything, this Viper's gonna have triple pipes on it, and it's starting to become winter here slowly, and this thing's in about a couple hundred pieces. So I've got some stuff I want to talk to you about today. This video in specific is going to be about studding your track. I'm going to go over some other stuff about like drivers too, the difference between 8 and 9-tooth drivers, different track sizes that you're going to want to run. That's going to kind of go along with the drivers. Talk a little bit about gearing, show you guys a gearing chart from Max Performance Catalog in 2004. And then I'm going to go through some heat exchanger protectors. These are the protectors that I'm talking about. These are for the front heat exchanger. These are Bender Racing. I also have some Bender Racing rear heat exchanger protectors. These ones were new in the package. I actually have all the original rivets and stuff. I didn't have the original packaging for these, but I wish I did, because the rear heat exchanger protectors, new in the package, came with the original instructions, which is nice. So we'll go through this too. So I'll install these, film myself installing them, talk about how to install them. These ones here in the center, these are original rear heat exchanger protectors from a Yamaha Viper. These are what would have came on the factory. As you can see, they look a little bit different than the Bender Racing ones did. And then these are tunnel protectors. Nice set that I found on eBay. This sled, when I bought it used, obviously, and it didn't come with any of these protectors. Somebody had removed them because they wanted to run a taller lug track. But I'm gonna stud this track, and so I need these protectors. Here's the underside of my sled right now. I've got it kind of nice and clean. I did hose it down with some soapy water and scrub it with some very fine steel wool. There's what my front heat exchanger looks like. I did have to do some grinding right there and right there, just to grind down the old welds from the original protectors that were on this. Good look at the rear heat exchanger. We'll be installing protectors on that as well. So this is a gearing chart, and kind of just like track studding guide from 2004 Max Performance Catalog. And this is a really helpful source of information. My favorite part is this Yamaha track application and gearing information. This little section here is awesome. This is going to help someone if you have one of these two-stroke sleds and you don't know what the maximum lug height is that you can run on it without changing drivers. It's also a good source of information if you want to figure out what the maximum lug height is and what's the max lug height you can run studded with a studded track without switching drivers, or how you would do that. So I'm going to read you through it a little bit here. Here are some guidelines for track applications and gearing on 1997 and newer two-stroke model Yamaha snowmobiles. 1-inch tracks can be used and studded with the proper use of those heat exchanger and tunnel protectors that we talked about earlier. I showed you those on the snowmobile. When you're using 1-inch tracks, you can stud up to 1.175 inches safely. Okay. The next line says 1 1/4 tracks and 1 1/2 tracks can be used without studs if you remove the existing heat exchanger protectors, or the existing stud protectors, which would include your heat exchanger protectors and your tunnel protectors. So my sled came with a 1 1/4 track. It was not studded, and it had 9-tooth stock drivers in it. And then since the previous owner wanted to do a 1.25 track on it, he had to remove the stud protectors to allow the clearance between the track lugs and that front heat exchanger underneath the tunnel. Now this next line is important if you have a 1 1/4 track and you want to stud it. 1 1/4 tracks can be used and studded if you have the proper heat exchanger and tunnel protectors, and this is important, you need to replace the stock 9-tooth front axle drivers with 8-tooth drivers. 8-tooth drivers are required for the necessary clearance between the taller track lug and the stud protectors. When you're installing the 8-tooth drivers, the final gear ratio is affected. Therefore, you will need to change the gears in the chain case to correct this to the proper ratio that you want. If you're curious between the difference, this is 8-tooth drivers from a Yamaha Viper Mountain. They came stock with 8-tooth drivers. And then these are 9-tooth drivers from my 2003 Viper S. So, look how big the 9-tooth drivers are in comparison to the 8-tooth drivers. There's a significant difference in size, and so having those smaller 8-tooth drivers is going to give you much more clearance in between your track and that front heat exchanger. So since I want to stud my track that's a 1.25 lug, I need to switch down to these 8-tooth drivers to provide that extra clearance so I don't damage that front heat exchanger with the studs. If I wanted to run 9-tooth drivers, I could still run a 1.25 inch lug track, but I could not stud it because I would not have the room. Those studs would puncture the fins of your front heat exchanger. By switching down to these 8-tooth drivers on my Viper, it's going to affect, just like this said, my final gear drive ratio. In order to fix that, I need to change my gearing in my sled. So stock, my 2003 Viper came with a 21-tooth top gear in the chain case, a 38-tooth bottom gear in the chain case, and a 68-link chain. And then the stock Viper gear ratio is 1.81. Now I need to figure out how I'm going to get back to that 1.81 drive ratio, which is what I want for my sled. Yours can be different though. You'll have to do some research. I want to get as close to the stock ratio as possible. To do that, I need a 23-tooth top gear, a 37-tooth bottom gear, and that same 68-link chain that came on at stock. And that gets me really, really close to the stock drive ratio. It gets me to a 1.82, which is just a little more than a 1.81. The way I figured that out is all through this chart in this Max Performance catalog. It says right here down at this section how to calculate your drive ratio with 8-tooth drivers. And then the gear ratios are on the back. Here's the gear ratios with 9-tooth drivers. Here's the gear ratios with 8-tooth drivers. You'll see that to get to that 1.82 drive ratio, which is really close to that 1.81 that it came with stock, I need a 23 tooth top gear, 37 tooth bottom gear, and then a 68 link chain. This actually had a typo. I originally, it said 70 link. It's actually a 68 though, which it just figures that though actually the one that I need was the one that had a typo, which is kind of funny. But so what I have here is, this is a 37 tooth bottom gear, a 23 tooth top gear, 68 link chain. These are, I ordered these online from somebody on Facebook, and that's going to get me to my gear ratio of 1.82 with the 8 tooth drivers. I hope that made sense. It's kind of a lot. It'll take you a minute to figure it out, but here's all this information for you, just so you have it. So this video, I think I'm just going to make it installing I'm probably not going to install drivers in this video. I wanted to talk about the drivers because they're related to the stud protectors and why I'm doing the stud protectors. But I have a separate video on how to change a Yamaha Viper track. I filmed like the whole thing, like start to finish, every single nut and bolt taken apart, every single nut and bolt put back into the sled. Go check out that video if you want to know how to like install drivers. I show how to do that in that video. Other than that, the rest of this video is pretty much just going to be installing these protectors into the snowmobile. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. I'll show you the size rivets I'm using to rivet them on. One of the things I think we're going to have to do is remove this gas tank off this sled, which is kind of a pain. It's not that bad. A couple things that you have to remove. This whole plastic cover has to come off. And then there's just like a couple on the oil tank, one on each side, couple bolts, and just various little things that I got to make sure, some disconnectors that I got to take apart too. I'll probably film a separate video on just removing the gas tank because I'm going to be doing it anyways, and it's really not going to take me that long. So I'm probably just going to film a little 5-minute video on myself removing it, just in case anybody needs that too. But basically the reason why you need to remove that gas tank is because your tunnel protectors rivet on through these holes. Those holes, there's one here. You can see kind of where they used to be going down the tunnel of my sled. The 2 or 3 that are up here closer to the front heat exchanger, you need to rivet them from the top. So the end of the rivet is going to be sticking out the bottom of that protector. So those protectors get mounted up like this. And I got to figure out to make sure, pretty sure it's this way at least. I'll figure it out. And then when I install them, I'll show you guys. But where we need to rivet this into the top of the snowmobile tunnel here, it's this one and this one. I think this one's in the engine bay, but these 2 or 3, we need to rivet downwards because you can't put a rivet up without hitting the tank. It's getting kind of late tonight, so I don't think I'm going to do all of this tonight. What I think I am going to start with, though, is installing the rear heat exchanger protectors first, and film that and show you guys how to install those. Don't forget, these are the Bender Racing ones, but honestly, the stock ones should be the exact same. Well, I'll walk you guys through the instructions here. But these are specifically the instructions for the rear heat exchanger protectors. The instructions would be different for the front heat exchanger protectors because these are going to be a little more complicated to install because we don't want to drill into the radiator and we don't want to drill into anything in the engine bay. But the first thing on here says clean the contents out of the trunk. That's not relevant to us, obviously, at least for me, because I don't have my seat on here. It says tip the sled on its side or raise the rear high enough to gain access. We have that done as far as I'm concerned for me. Raise or rest one protector against the heat exchanger with the thick end of the protector viewed from the side. So it's talking about this as the thick end, which is kind of confusing, but I'll show you how it goes on. And then you put it over the first mounting rivet on the lower side of the heat exchanger protector, and then you slide that protector towards the outside of the sled as far as it'll go. So I'll show you here. You're also going to need a 3/16 drill bit. That's the size of these holes. So get yourself a 3/16 drill bit and a drill. So I'm going to show you guys where to put these on my rear heat exchanger. You can see, you're going to notice where you can still kind of see where the mounting holes are and where the tunnel protector used to sit. You're going to align the protector up with the tunnel protector. So it's going to sit like this, basically. So it wants you to put it on this rivet, this bottom rivet. So you're going to have one here and one here. Oops, dropping stuff. So one's going to go, you'll put it over the rivet. There's two rivets here. So basically, I'll show you how they're going to look. They're going to look just like this. But you're going to put it over the rivet and then slide it all the way to the left until this part hits the rivet. And if you do that, it's going to line you up perfectly with where your tunnel protector is going to be. So you're going to have one there, put this one on, slide it all the way to the left until we hit that rivet, and it's going to line up where those should be. So that's where they're going to be. And then it wants us to drill the top holes first. Really, I don't think it would matter if you drilled the top or the bottom, but I'll probably just drill the top and follow the instructions. So taking my protector, resting on here all the way to the left, these little tabs that are on the side should sit flush with your heat exchanger. So make sure when you put them on, you have it slid all the way over to the left. We should be lined up, but these need to sit flush. So make sure you don't have it tipped too much, because now this one's not sitting flush. So about right there. Now I'm gonna grab my drill. So about right there is where we're gonna want it. Right there. Then we're going to use this as a guide. Make sure I'm drilling straight up. Now that I've got that started, I can take it out. Right through the exchanger and the tunnel. And that should be perfect. So now that I got my hole drilled, I'm going to put it up there, and I'm going to reach around with my rivet, poke it through, and you can see it went right through that protector. So that was about perfect. So these rivets, the size for them, they are aluminum rivets that came with the bender ones. I suppose you could put on steel rivets if you wanted to. I think for the back heat exchanger, the aluminum's going to be fine. Where I'm probably going to put steel rivets is in those front heat exchanger protectors, because those are the ones that are more likely that the track lug might hit, and they're going to need a little more strength. So those steel rivets are going to give us a little more strength in the front. But I think these aluminum rivets that were provided with the bender rear exchanger protectors are going to do just fine for this. So the size of these, if I didn't say, it's 3/16, obviously. That's the size drill bit we use, 3/16, and then there are 1/4 inch long. So now what I'm going to do is, I haven't drilled any of the other holes. I've just drilled that one hole. Now what I'm going to do is hold that protector up on that rivet, and I'm going to secure this rivet before I drill the other 3 holes. So I've got that one secured on there, which is going to hold this just enough. You'll have to push up on the protector just a little bit. Make sure it will wiggle back and forth a little bit. Make sure you get it at the right angle, and then we'll put the second one in. I'm probably just going to do this one. And then we will do the second rivet. Put that rivet in from the back side. If you have your snow flap on, I obviously don't, but make sure you're not drilling through your snow flap. That is right where the snow flap would be. And then I'm gonna go ahead and hold that and then rivet that on place. So now I'm gonna go ahead and drill my other 2 holes and then put the other protector on the other side the same exact way. Now this one here, I'm noticing it's not like super flush with the bottom of the heat exchanger here if you're looking at it from a side view. So the way I'm gonna fix that before I drill it is I'm gonna put a pair of vice grips on it. And I'm gonna leave my space for myself to drill, but just on the edge. Put a couple vice grips, and that's pulling it right to the heat exchanger. That way, before I drill, I'm not gonna drill it, and it's gonna be off when I go to put that rivet in. And I want the rivet to be able to get all the way through that, and I don't want there to be any gaps in between this and the heat exchanger. All right, here they are, all said and done. Nice and secure. A couple of these I had to take a vice grip to and squeeze it because the bend, it was almost like, I'm sure the bend was right on these, but I'm sure just like with the snow flap on here, the back of my tunnels here has been tweaked a couple times. As you can see, it has been re-riveted and that one's actually loose. So that one's gonna need addressed. Oh, these are both loose. Okay, great. I'll address those. I don't think either one of these are loose. They're not loose, but I might put 4 new rivets in the back of my tunnel here. I didn't know that. But anyways, I got them mounted up. Pretty solid. I'm happy with those. I think the aluminum rivets are going to be okay, being that this is the, I don't want to say lesser important protectors, but definitely, in my opinion, as far as I know, the front heat exchanger protectors are going to be just a little more needed than these two. But these are going to protect this rear heat exchanger. If we hit a big bump, suspension comes up, it'll protect this from the studs penetrating the radiator. All right, so I do apologize. I skipped a little ahead in this video, but as you can see, I now have the tunnel protectors on. And the reason I didn't film any of that is because I feel like for the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. And secondly, I feel like this is definitely a 2-person job. This is the way that they go underneath the tunnel. They face this way with the outer lip of the tunnel protector facing down. There is 8 rivets in each of these on both sides. In order to put them on, you need to remove the gas tank. And I talked about this briefly in the other, in the first half of this video, but you do need to remove the tank because there are 4. Here's the tank where the tank bolts are in the back. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 on both sides underneath the gas tank that you're gonna need access to in order to rivet those on. What the top of the tunnel looks like after you have all those rivets in, you should already have the holes. Like I said, there was 8 on each side. And then here's the stuff that I used in order to rivet those down. So they're 3/16 of a 3/16 hole, 3/16 size rivet, and then I ended up doing a 1/2 inch. I did use stainless steel rivets. Originally, I would guess that these came with aluminum rivets, but in my experience, aluminum rivets, especially for something that the track is going to come up and they have the potential to get bumped, in my experience, aluminum rivets stretch. Yes, I know that stainless steel rivets and backers for those or washers for those aren't going to be the best option because stainless steel and aluminum is obviously going to corrode. But if you look at this snowmobile, this thing's 23 years old now. And, you know, you can see there are some steel rivets in here that have started to rust. So to me, it's not the end of the world. I would rather have the stainless steel rivets than aluminum rivets because I don't want the aluminum rivets to stretch and then those tunnel protectors underneath this tunnel get all loose. And then I have to go through this whole process again to tighten them up. So I just decided I'm going to use stainless steel rivets. They're going to have more rust. They're going to be more resistant to rust than like just a regular steel rivet would. But that being said, I don't want to do this whole project all over again. Did make sure that when I ordered these rivets, I ordered them from Fasteneer. You can see they're 3/16 by a 1/2 inch long. And then I did make sure I got the ones with the larger flange on them because I didn't want these to like end up like that one right there. It might be hard to see on camera, but it's kind of bulging. And so I went ahead and I went with the larger flange ones on top to prevent them from bending or getting tweaked a little bit more. As far as these two up here, I did have to, with the large flange, grind down a little flat spot on both sides of the rivet. And then I will post a picture how I got these two rivets in without removing any of the oil tank, removing the fuel pump, any of this. I figured out a way and it actually worked really well. What I used for all of these rivets was this rivet tool. I got this from Harbor Freight. They're $20. They give you a lot more leverage than your standard handheld one would. Did use a standard handheld one for these two up here, but I'll show you that picture. I used a C-clamp to crimp it down that way because I couldn't get this large pair into here. And I'll post a picture of that and that'll all make sense. Going back under the tunnel, you can see I had the rivet and a washer, a stainless steel washer under every single one of them. I said that's definitely a two-person job. It's kind of a pain in the butt, I'm not gonna lie. Just because you have to take the tank off, and then my shroud was attached to my tank, so my shroud had to come off, or the plastic cover around the tank at the top with all the switches and stuff. So definitely something you wouldn't really want to do twice, and that's why I went with the stainless steel ones. Lastly, I'm going to be installing the front heat exchanger protectors that go in the front of the tunnel on the front heat exchanger. All right, so sorry if the light's moving around a lot here. I'm wearing a headlamp under here. But as you can see, I started to mount the front heat exchanger protector on this. These are the Bender heat exchanger protectors, as I talked about before. It's been a couple days since I've started filming any of this, so please bear with me if I'm repeating a couple things a few times. So as you can see, I started to install it. In my opinion, the Bender front heat exchanger protectors aren't the best fitment. I think they could have been designed just a little bit better, but that's just my personal opinion. You can see that I figured it out, that to start off, I struggled figuring out how to put these on. I have the second protector here. At first, I thought they might go on the inside like this. You can see the difference rather than underneath the skid plate like this. And obviously this one would go over here. I'm just showing you because it's in the middle of the camera. But I originally thought they'd go on the inside, but then when you go to stick a rivet through the bottom, it leaves you virtually no room to put a rivet through. You have virtually no gap right in there to for even the mandrel on the rivet to be able to pull through and lock this on here. So that was the first issue. The second issue is that when you go to mount it below, there's a gap up here. I'll try to show you. And I'll insert a couple pictures right here too. But there is a gap in the top when you put this on the bottom. So this is the way that, like, on a Yamaha SRX, the original front heat exchanger protectors, they mounted on the bottom of the skid plate, just like I'm gonna mount these ones. and I'll insert a picture of that right here. So when you go to put your bender heat exchanger protectors on, you're going to find that when you go to put them on the bottom, there's going to be a gap. The way that I solved that issue was by bending the two top tabs until they were really, really close and they touched the top of the heat exchanger. You can see that I have this one mounted and it's touching the top of the heat exchanger up here. So I did have to take those two tabs in a vise and just bend them back a little bit until they touched the top of the heat exchanger. Remember that as you're mounting them, they need to go in the correct spot, which is in line with where your tunnel protectors were going to be. You can see roughly where these ones are going to sit. On mine, you can see where the previous person had ground down a little bit, the original protectors, and that's where I placed them over top of. So for this one, it's going to go about right here. There's a rivet underneath here. So it's the second, it pretty much goes over the second rivet in. So this one, it's going to go over. You can see where the old protector was right there. And this one's pretty much going to go right here. Now I'm going to show you the inside of my engine bay really quick and talk about where these rivets are going to come through when we're drilling them up in through the front heat exchanger protector. Before I take you into the engine bay, I do also want to point out that I did have to replace these three rivets right here. They were super loose, which was causing my skid plate to sag in the back a little bit. And that was causing the protectors to not fit so well. So I did have to chisel out and drill these three rivets. I could literally pull up on the skid plate and spin the rivets with my finger. They were so loose. And that's probably just because this has been hit. The skid plate's been hit a couple times on various things over the last 20 years. But I did replace those with large flange stainless steel rivets. And I'll show you where those are on the inside of the engine bay as well. All right, here's what the inside of the engine bay looks like. The reason I'm showing you this right now is because I actually clearly have the engine out of my sled. And that was because, honestly, I wanted to replace those rivets down on the skid plate, and I couldn't get a backer washer onto the rivet without pulling the engine. It ended up turning out really well for me that when I pulled the engine, it's actually going to be easier to replace any motor mounts that I needed to replace and was planning on replacing. And I found an enormous mouse nest down here all the way in the backside of the engine, which would have been, it was nearly impossible for me to ever know that was down there with the engine actually in it. So that alone was a big fire hazard. So I'm glad I took the engine out just to figure that out. Anyways, you can see that this is the skid plate right here, as well as like this. This is all the skid plate down here. And these are my new rivets. That one, there's one under there that you can barely see. And then this one right here. So those are my three rivets. There was literally a gap between this and then this is part of where these mount is part of your front heat exchanger, which is right here. You can see the hoses going into that right there. And then it also goes in right there. So I replaced those three rivets. The rivets I used for those were also stainless steel. Stainless steel and aluminum don't go super well together, but I honestly just didn't want to do all this over again, replace it with an aluminum rivet, and then it stretches and becomes loose over time. So I went ahead and put a stainless steel one in with a stainless steel backer washer. Now, we talked about mounting the bottom of the protector to the skid plate using the rivets. I'll show you what rivets I'm going to use for that. And then as for the top two holes, we bent these in the vise a little bit on my other one. And then where these holes are going to drill is going to be right in this area here. You can see there's two rivets right here. And then there's one back here, 2, 3, 4, 5. So remember how I talked about how we're going to mount that protector pretty much over the second rivet in on both sides, which would be this rivet, and then the one right there. So it's going to be important that as we're drilling, it's going to drill on both sides of that. So we're going to get a hole right here and a hole right here, and then the same as for the rivet under this heat exchanger tube. So it's going to be important that as we're drilling, we're not drilling into our motor mounts. It's important that I'm not going to drill a hole right through this coolant hose. So I'm probably going to take this coolant hose off and get this wiring out of the way. That way, when I go to drill the holes, I'm not going to hit anything behind. The reason I wanted to show you this, though, is because if you don't have your engine out, there are going to be a couple things that you're going to need to try to avoid before you drill those holes. And so having my engine out is a really good opportunity to just show you guys where those holes are going to be and then where the back of the rivet is going to be when we're riveting these in. Now, when we go to rivet these, you certainly also could put the rivet in from this way, just like Yamaha did. Although, in my personal opinion, it's not going to matter. I would say if you have the opportunity to put them in through this way, do it. Have somebody hold the rivet and you can rivet them from up above. Otherwise, if you could rivet it from underneath too, and I don't think that would be an issue either. So the one I'm going to mount on camera for you guys is this one, and there is nothing in the way from these rivets. So I'm going to be careful not to go into my motor mount here on this side, but this side is going to be the main one that you're going to want to watch out for, this coolant hose and this wiring harness here. All right, as for the rivets I'm using for the bottom here, the bottom of this protector, these are the rivets I'm using. I'm using Fastener rivets. They're stainless steel, and the size is 3/16 by 1/4 of an inch. And then you're going to drill a 3/16 hole, obviously, with a drill bit. When you're drilling these, I took a little piece of metal. Obviously, you don't want to drill a hole here and then drill up through your heat exchanger. So what I did was I took a little piece of sheet metal and I bent it in half until it fit nearly perfectly in between the gap. So yeah, I can barely get it out now. But what that's going to do is, this is steel and it's going to prevent us from drilling up into the heat exchanger. So as we drill this, I'm just going to put this right in here like that. Before you go ahead and drill your first hole, just like I did, don't forget that you need to have your protector lined up with your tunnel protectors. This is going to keep the protector in line with your track window to avoid any of those studs that you're going to be using in your track. So I'm putting my piece of metal in here, and I'm going to push my stud protector all the way up against the fins of my front heat exchanger, and make sure that when I'm pushing it up, it's also up like this. I'm pushing it back and up against the skid plate. And then I'm going to take my 3/16 drill bit and drill a hole right here. And it's aluminum, so it's really thin. All right, I'm going to check out my progress now. All right, so I went ahead and moved the camera so you guys could see a little better, but that hole went out and it drilled out nicely. Don't forget to remove your little piece. Another thing that I don't like about these is look how close that hole is to the edge of the skid plate. Like, there's hardly any room where if something came and hit this heat exchanger protector from the underside while you were riding, it gives you little to no room for that rivet to be ripped right out of this skid plate and your stud protector to be loose. This side had a little more. This is a 20-year-old sled, so your skid plate's probably going to be bent up a little bit. It's not going to be perfect. As you can see, mine's a little wavy. But still, even when it's super flat, they really didn't give you much bite into the skid plate, which is another disadvantage to these protectors, in my opinion. In my opinion, they could have brought the holes a little further back on the actual protector. They could have brought these holes a little further out. I thought about re-drilling my own, like in the middle here. That would go back a little further. The holes would go back a little further onto the skid plate. But I didn't. It should be okay. So now what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna go ahead and put my rivet through it. You can see how much. As you can see, I don't have washers. I'm not using backup washers. And the only reason I'm not using backup washers is one, because these are stainless steel. They're super strong. They're from Fasteneer. I do wanna inform you that the steel rivets that you get at like Menards are not gonna be a super high quality steel like these Fasteneer ones are. In my experience, these you have to drill out, and usually it burns up your drill bit a little bit when you go to drill these out. Whereas like one from Menards, the drill bit will eat right through those, even if they're steel, and you can usually chisel them off with just like 1 or 2 hits. So I do want to make that note that like a good quality rivet is going to be your friend. So that's the first reason. The second reason is if I were to put a backup washer on here, I really don't have much bite with the rivet. Like the rivet isn't holding that much by the time I put a washer on there. So that's the reason. So I'm gonna go ahead, all I'm doing right now is putting my rivet in the rivet gun. I'm gonna put it up through that hole, and I'm not gonna cinch it all the way down just yet. I'm gonna cinch it just good enough until it's pretty tight, like I did with this one. As you can see, the left one was still loose. I didn't cinch it all the way down because I'm gonna wait until I drill my top holes and get my rivets part way in there before I button everything up. So I'm just gonna give it a little tug, just like that. And I didn't snap off the rivet, the mandrel yet. It's just holding in there. It's still loose, but it's just gonna hold in there just good enough until I get these top ones drilled. All right, now for the top ones, I am using a different length of rivet, which I'll talk about in just a second. But for these top ones, remember that you're not drilling straight in, you're drilling kind of up. So you're literally drilling up towards your motor mount. So you're gonna wanna be careful of that motor mount to avoid it. But I'm gonna go ahead, get it pushed up here, take my 3/16 drill bit, and I'm gonna go ahead and drill that hole. Make sure everything's going smoothly. That's looking nice. Now I'm gonna stop this video and I'm gonna drill out both of these holes. Before I drill the left one out, I am gonna shove a rivet through there just to hold it in place to make sure my holes line up perfectly. I went ahead and drilled that and put a rivet. The rivet size that I'm using for those top ones, still Fasteneer, still stainless steel, but they're 3/16 by 1/2 inch. So this is what they look like. And up top, there was no problems. We completely avoided the motor mount. So now I'm gonna go ahead and drill my left one out. All right, so I went ahead and got my left hole drilled with this hole, with that rivet in it. And then go ahead and put my second rivet in. And now I'm gonna go up top to the engine bay and show you where these rivets came out. All right, so where the rivets came out are right here. You can see the one sticking through right there, and then the other one's right here. It kind of fell back in there. But they did actually, when I drilled the hole, they completely avoided the motor mount, which was good. The way that I had them bent must have just barely avoided that. So for these two, I am gonna put a couple of stainless steel washers on the back. I'm gonna go ahead and button this left one down and then push that one back up through, put a stainless steel washer on this side. The reason that I'm putting the washers on these sides is simply because I have room to do it. I have plenty of rivets coming out and plenty of room for that rivet to crush down on that washer. And I'm not quite gonna cinch this all the way down just yet. I am going to see if I can keep that rivet in there just so it keeps the hole lined up, but it should be okay. There, it snapped off. And I'm gonna go back up to the engine bay and make sure that that looks okay with that washer on there. All right, those are looking pretty good to me, pretty tight. washers are on there nice and tight. Let's go ahead and button up the bottom of that protector now. There's one. And two. Super solid. All my rivets look nice. They're nice and flush. I don't think that's going anywhere. Those stainless steel rivets are going to help just in case something does catch the bottom, or something gets caught in here, a stick, and bashes into these. Having those stainless steel rivets instead of aluminum, since aluminum stretches, I think is going to benefit me for a long time, hopefully. I'm going to do the same exact thing to my other side with this protector. The first thing I'm going to do though is, just by using visual references, holding this up to the bottom of the skid plate and then bending these tabs in my vise until they seem like they're as good as they're going to get. This is kind of the way that I've been doing this. You don't have to put a towel in there. I'm just kind of particular. And bend it back a little bit. You can see it bent a little bit. And I just keep doing this, bending them and adjusting them. Obviously not trying to bend them too much until they snap off, but just these little minor adjustments until I feel like this lines up with the top of my heat exchanger. All right, so I've got those tabs bent to where they line up. I mean, I'm underneath the skid plate and they're sitting flush. There's a little bit of a gap. I don't want to snap these tabs off. And with this being aluminum, that steel rivet should pull it in, just like any gap in here, just a little bit closer to the skid plate. So what I'm doing right now is I'm lining this up right over the second rivet. You can see where the old skid plate was, where I grinded that down. So you're pretty much going to want to be in the center of that, just like the other one. So I'm going to put it as close to the center as possible just by visually looking at it. And then before I drill, I'm not going to forget to put my piece of steel in between the skid plate and the radiator, or the heat exchanger. Put that right in the middle, and I'm going to drill my bottom holes first, in the middle. And once I get that started, I'm going to verify that I have it in the right spot, and then continue drilling that all the way through. All right, so I got that hole drilled. And then this is pretty much exactly where I left off. For you guys, with the first protector, I'm gonna take my 3/16 by a 1/4 inch long rivet right up through. Clean up any junk that's in there. And I'm gonna like halfway secure this one down. And then that pretty much leaves you guys right where we left off, right where I left off with the last protector on the left side. All right, so with the second heat exchanger all mounted up, one of the rivets landed here. And then the other rivet ended up landing right there. So those cinched down really nice. Show you what it looks like on the underside, all said and done. Here's what the underside looks like with both protectors. As you can see, they're lined up with our tunnel protectors. Kind of hard to tell on video. Kind of looks like they're not through my camera right now, but they are. They're right in line with those tunnel protectors. And that wraps it up for this whole video. I hope you guys found this video helpful. I hope it at least helps a couple people out in the future. I know I struggled with some of this, especially these front heat exchanger protectors, how to get those mounted up. The actual tunnel protectors, and then behind me in the back side of the tunnel, the rear heat exchanger protectors were pretty self-explanatory, but you never know. I hope this video just at least helped a couple people. So have a good day.